I could just recognize some of them at this very powerful table right across from me. We have Consul Burkhard Grant from the German consulate, Consulate Grant. Are you with us? Just give us a... On the Kansas Willkommen, Consul. Thank you for being with us. We have Pierre Le Petit, Consul of France. And Joe Hinton from Model Oil President in Europe, is that correct? There's so many colleagues and so many friends around me and so on, but I still would like to recognize Michael Kotavi from UT Austin. Pleasure having you. As you see, this room is full today. That's beautiful. It was not always the case. Last year, we were walking around and looking at other associations. We were a little bit envious of them. We would sit in those rooms full of people, and we were the newcomers, were the baby, so to say, of SWFAD. Well, we will have a full report from our program chair, but I'd just like to share with you that as of yesterday, we had over 125 registrations, so we doubled the numbers compared to last year. And I think we all deserve, and for ourselves for being here, it just proves how strong we are growing and how the interest in international business is growing. And welcome to all of you, and thank you very much for making this year such a great success. We will diverge today a little bit from our somewhat traditional type of meeting. What we used to do or did last year was that we met here for the luncheon, and then immediately after that we conducted business. And we had some suggestions to perhaps try and change it this year so that people could go to the earlier session and not be disturbed by that. And then meet again at 5:15 for our business session. This one is I think everyone is important, and this one is especially important. The 2-year cycle is over, and we have to get together to perform, do the elections, and elect the officers, so that the future meetings we will have will be as successful and maybe even more successful as well. So we will enjoy the food now, and we will enjoy the presentation of Sims, and I will ask Syed Tariq Anwar to come forward and to help with the presentation.
Thank you, Mike. Good afternoon. Before I introduce to you Mr. Syed, I would like to mention 3 things. We are more than 130 people now registered, so this is the largest ever crowd we had, and we broke all the last 10 years records. And the third largest, and I strongly believe on one word, as competition. If you do not have a competition, it means something is wrong. Competition is healthy, it makes you stay lean and mean, and I think it's good. So basically, we will have all the track chairs recognized at 5:15, but at this time, just for a second, I would like all the track chairs to stand up and be recognized. This is all your effort. All the track chairs, please stand up. And one more announcement. We had a wonderful session. Mr. Hinton, Mike Kotavi, Yaya Zubair, Ray Brimble, all these people carry Cooper. But I forgot to give you your certificates. I will make sure that you get your certificates. We are going to recognize you also. I just got tied up and I just forgot, so I apologize for that. Mr. Richard Sims is a co-founder of the Software Spectrum and served as the president of the company from 1983 to March 1996. In April 1996, Mr. Sims assumed the title of Senior Vice President with responsibility for the company's Asia Pacific expansion and operations. He's also integrally involved with the software spectrum's internal information system design. Mr. Sims has also served as the director of the company's board of directors since 1983. Before founding Software Spectrum, Mr. Sims served as a controller for International Power Machines, a publicly held manufacturer of uninterruptible power supply systems for mainframe computers from 1980 to 1983. Prior to joining IBM, Mr. Sims served as a controller for SWFAD Incorporated, a publicly held women's sportswear and staff, accountant for Coopers and Knight Brand. Mr. Sims is married to Judy Shin. She's also here. Throughout Mr. Sims' career at Software Spectrum, he has managed sales, marketing, and companies consulting business, the technology services group. Richard has led Software Spectrum expansion into the international markets, including Canada and Europe. Mr. Sims also led the company's acquisitions of an Australia, New Zealand business in 1996 and has overseen Software Spectrum's subsequent Asia expansion. Mr. Sims is also the primary liaison with the company's Japanese joint venture, Uchida Spectrum. Mr. Sims is credited with founding and developing the initial sales office in each of these regions and recruiting the international sales management and sales forces. Today, Richard Sims focuses on developing policies for doing business internationally, such as pricing policies, including international growth and global sales force. Let's give a hand to Mr. Sims.
Well, thanks very much. I'm very honored to be here, very pleased to be here. I'll also say I'm a little surprised to be here in the sense that when I'm explaining sometimes the international operations profit and loss of our international divisions to our fellow officers or to our board of directors, I don't feel like the international business person of the year in some of those discussions. I feel like, again, the struggling business person with a successful American business trying to take it global. So I'm here today to talk a little bit about those struggles and, again, not representing the biggest international business you will find or the most international business, but just a good, solid American business that in trying to go global has had certainly a good degree of success we'll talk about, but a number of challenges, and hopefully I'll be interesting to you here today. So thanks very much. I'm very honored to be here. Can you all hear okay, by the way, from the back tables? Okay. Let me give you just a brief background, a few moments on myself and on the company, so that as I describe why we went international in the first place and what some of our experiences have been, you'll be able to relate to that. Personally, I'm a small-town Texas boy from a little town called Rosebeck, 100 miles south of here. I didn't know that banks were in the business, or were private businesses trying to make a profit until I was a senior in high school. I never left the state of Texas until I was out of college, so I didn't grow up having dreams of becoming an international business person whatsoever. I had no international business courses at UC Austin, where I went to school. I'm an accountant. I'm very much a confirmed introvert. So why have I spent 15 years of my life building a sales and marketing organization, and why did I spend the last 6 years doing that internationally? I can't really answer that question, but life takes all these twists and turns, so I try to go with the twists and turns that life has taken me. So that's a little bit about who I am. The company, at this point, has about 1,700 employees, and I'm going to talk a bit about where we were 4 years ago and where we are today, since we began our international expansion basically about 5 years ago. So at this point, we do two key things as a business at Software Spectrum. Foremost, and throughout our history, we sell personal computer software to large businesses. So we're not Microsoft who develops the software. We take the software, Microsoft and Symantec and Lotus and companies like that. We take their software and sell it as a reseller to large customers, predominantly multinationals. So that's the biggest piece of our business at this point. There's about, let's say, 900 people in our company devoted to that part of the business. That's about 85 or 90% of our revenue. The smaller part of our revenue, but almost as many people, about 800 people, is a relatively new division of our company, meaning the last 5 or 6 consulting business and the telephone support business. So in telephone support, if you call up Microsoft or Lotus or Symantec for support on their products, you may be getting someone from Software Spectrum who answers the phone, Symantec or Microsoft or McAfee or whatever. We provide phone support to users in the U.S. and outside the U.S. on personal computer packages. We also do consulting around products like Microsoft Exchange, Microsoft NT, Lotus Notes, and those kind of products. So we've grown that business to about 800 people. From a couple other facts to help you understand why we've done what we've done, Microsoft products make up about 55% of our sales. It's probably not a surprise that a software company is heavily influenced by Microsoft. So we jump when they say jump, and we try to ask them ahead of time when they're going to, in what way they're going to ask us to jump, so we can be ready. Because they are absolutely the dominant force in the business, and luckily we have a very good relationship with them. And that's something that if we didn't have a good relationship with them, we wouldn't have grown our business and be where we are today. Multinational customers, really Fortune 500 type of multinational customers or companies make up about 70% of our business. So if you took a U.S. Fortune 500 list, we are the primary seller to 200 or so of those companies. So you know our customer base. They are not just U.S. based. U.S. based companies among that, obviously operations throughout the world. We've added a lot of European customers at this point, European-based multinationals, et cetera, but that's our customer base. Last piece about our business to understand is, you can obviously take those two facts and know we sell a lot of Microsoft software to lots of big multinational companies. Well, in the last 5 years, that doesn't mean we send them lots of boxes of Excel or Word. Basically, they sign a license agreement that lets them make all the copies they want, as long as they tell Microsoft or Lotus or Symantec how many copies they make. So that's a bit of perspective on the basic business we're in, and that'll feed into why did we try to go global in the first place. At this point, among our 1,700 employees, we have about 200 employees, 220 employees outside the U.S., and that's about 20 in Canada, about 90 in Europe, and about 110 or 20 in Asia. So we're at the point of having a substantial presence by our standards, not by certain other standards, but by our standards. There's a lot of people internationally. We do about $140 million of revenue internationally versus a total of 900, so it's about 15% of our total revenue. And where were we 4 years ago? Well, we had about $7 million of revenue internationally 4 years ago, so we've gone from 7 to 140 million in a period of about 4 years. And we've gone from about 20 employees internationally to a couple hundred or so at this point. So in the last 4 or 5 years, we basically built that international presence. And at that same time, the fundamental business we're in, selling software, the gross margins have gone from about 15% to 10%. So we've done, by our standards, a major international expansion when 1/3 of our gross margin was disappearing just due to marketplace conditions, greater competition, etc. So been a pretty exciting ride. Why did we go international? So, here we were a Dallas-based company. We had developed business across the U.S. We're successful, making money, had gone public. A lot of things were going very well in our business, so why did we want to risk that and go international? Fundamentally for us, it came down to, again, what are we selling and to whom are we selling it? We were selling this licensing software to, software licenses, let's say, to multinationals. And as you look at the PC, the personal computer industry, 5 or 6 years ago was when you began to hear all this about client-server computing, strategic PCs. And basically what that meant is, again, we have a gentleman from mobile here. If you look 10 years ago, mobile, whether it was Dallas or Virginia or London or wherever, they had a bunch of PCs, but they were in work groups. They did word processing. They did some spreadsheets. That was fine. But about 4 or 5 years ago, they recognized that, a lot of the future of any large company's strategic PC, strategic computing platform is going to be on PCs. So suddenly, the CIO of these Fortune 500 companies starts looking around going, I need a global strategy around personal computers. I need to run the same software, maybe the same hardware, but the same networks. I need to deploy the same kind of products. So suddenly our traditional customer base came to us and said, well, gee, you're doing a fine job servicing us in the U.S., but what can you do for us in Europe and in Asia? And, initially our answer was, well, not really a whole lot, but love to know what else can, so we get to keep your business. So that's a good answer for a year or so. And then as more and more came to us, we realized, well, if we really want to keep this business, we're going to have to do something besides just be a good good supplier in the U.S. So at that time, we decided how could we expand internationally? And we looked at, can we rebuild our entire infrastructure in 10 different countries in Europe? Can we rebuild that in 15 countries in Asia? We knew we couldn't do that. So we started looking for a way to grow our business, but do it in as cost-effective a manner as possible. Again, in that business that was 15% gross margin, beginning to decline down to 10. So over the last several years, we went into Canada first of all, which again, if you're from Groesbeck, Texas, and haven't traveled much international, Canada's the safest place to go. It's more of a good market. Let's kind of learn about Canada. It's kind of close to the U.S. It does business a lot like the U.S. Went to Canada first, about 5 or 6 years ago, and then made the biggest expansion for ourselves was going into Europe 4 to 5 years ago. And then the last couple of years we went into Asia Pacific. So that's basically the sequence there. My role in each of those marketplaces was to go into the marketplace, hire the first employees, develop a sales and marketing strategy, trying to leverage that against our expertise in the U.S. and with our multinational customers as a starting point. So so developing and implementing that sales strategy is what I've done for the last 5 or 6 years. Most of this we built from scratch. We did do a couple of acquisitions. Years after we expanded into Canada, we did an acquisition there. Europe, we built entirely on our own efforts. And in Asia, we did an acquisition from the start. So you might say that we learned that Europe was hard to build from scratch. Let's try Asia with an acquisition and see if that's any easier. And the answer is no, that was not any easier. It might have been a little harder, actually, than it was in retrospect here. We also did a big U.S. acquisition that happened to have a Japanese joint venture in it about the time we were going to expand into Asia. So we got lucky. A lot of the traditional wisdom about Asia says you need a Japanese strategy and you need a rest of the Asian strategy. So we were very fortunate. We'd actually come to that conclusion, and we're very fortunate to get the joint venture in Japan as part of a substantially U.S. acquisition. As we expanded, again, we tried to find a cost-effective way to do that. And the way we run our business in the States is we have field salespeople throughout the U.S., but they all call Dallas, Texas to place orders and to do our accounting functions and run our IT, central operations. So we had a lot of people in Dallas and then relatively few people out around the U.S. So we had 5 salespeople in Chicago, and 4 in Houston, several in New York City, et cetera, et cetera. So we thought, can we do this in Europe? So we hired a consultant, went traveling through Europe, talking to publishers and customers, and got very mixed answers on can we build a central operations center and get customers from around Europe to call into it. Obviously, the technology was there, but culturally, would the customers accept that? A lot of advice said they couldn't do it, but we thought that was about the only way we could actually viably expand. So we chose Dublin, Ireland as an operations center and began to hire people with various language skills. So, in that office, we stocked it with German speakers, French speakers, Dutch speakers, Swedish speakers, etc. Built an operations center there and set up the free telephone lines coming in from free to the customer, of course, not free to us. Set up those free phone lines coming into Dublin and began to try to sell to large companies in Europe. And a lot of people told us it won't work. Probably the most troubling there was a lot of our own salespeople, 3 months on the end of the job, said it won't work. And so we did what we had done many times throughout the life of our business. We thanked our outside sales staff for their wonderful insight, but declined their kind offer to run our business for us, and we stuck with the strategy to see if it'll pan out and work. So we eventually convinced even our own salespeople that it would work. And basically, the kind of the nicest confirmation of that has been that our primary competitor in the U.S., who actually went to Europe before we did, recently announced they're closing all their back office operations in each individual country and moving those to a central operations concept in Europe. So not only has it worked for us, but it's worked better than our competitors' models. So we feel very vindicated that we had a pretty good strategy there. So that's been a success for us. In terms of some of these, and as we went to Asia, we acquired a company there that had a presence in Australia and New Zealand. And we took their Sydney office and built that up as our central operations center for Asia Pacific. So when you look around the world, we basically take all of our orders and do all of our accounting and processing and billing and collections from Dallas, Texas, Dublin, Ireland, and Sydney, Australia. So that is not an inexpensive thing to do, but that's certainly much less expensive than having an operations center in 20 different Texas, basically. So there's all these personal things. The only truly horrifying thing that's happened personally is when I was first meeting the chairman of the company that we got this joint venture with in Japan. And he's a gentleman who travels by chauffeur-driven Rolls Royce and takes me to dinner where we're having some fried seafood, some tempura basically. And they keep giving all this food. You don't really know. They actually would warn me a little bit. You probably won't like this one. You have a remote chance of actually liking this one. So we were having that kind of evening. And I was surviving by dipping everything heavily in soy sauce. And then they serve this truly large mushrooms, large fried mushrooms. So I get it firmly engrilled. At least I think I had it firmly engrilled in my chopsticks. Get it about 16 inches above the bowl of soy sauce. Lose control of it. Plunges into the bowl of soy sauce, splashing all over not only this table, but the next table, basically. So he had to retire one of his program shirts, but we're still friends anyway. So that's the only truly horrifying thing that's happened. I even know how to hand business cards out, when to bow, not to bow. So I'm making the cultural side okay, I guess. But a little more important from the business side. One of the issues, I'll talk about 5 or 6 issues here that are just probably will relate to some of the discussions you're having, just give you my own personal perspective of going international here. One of the biggest issues in our company was getting the people in our company that need to really support this expansion, getting them to do that. Now, you get lots of moral support when you start doing this sexy thing of going global. Everyone thinks that's very exciting. They kind of want to have some involvement in it, but when you suddenly start saying, you know, we have a project here that has to be done by finance for us to be able to do this. You know, we have to form a legal entity in these different countries. That has to be done by our staff here in Dallas since we haven't yet gone to that foreign country yet. We need to figure out what currencies we take. We need to figure out, gee, is the part number for what we sell going to be the same part number in Europe as it is in the U.S.? You have all these operational issues. And when you suddenly had chunks of 40-hour projects or 80-hour projects to be done by different departments, they all were willing to do it, but they had other things they had to do. So just getting the real nuts and bolts support from your own company and get real low margin business. Maybe we didn't staff that as much as we should. I don't think we're the only company trying to expand internationally that really didn't staff the headquarters function like maybe it should. So you have that kind of struggle, just getting everyone in your company to do the things that you have to do to go internationally. As I mentioned kind of early on, from a profitability standpoint, we still have some issues, a lot of issues with being profitable in these foreign marketplaces. The U.S. market, again, I didn't focus on this so much when we were building the U.S. business, but the U.S. marketplace is this huge marketplace, great economies of scale. You have some salespeople, inside salespeople in Dallas, Texas. You're selling to companies around the U.S. You put a couple of salespeople in Chicago. It's a huge city. New York's a huge city. San Francisco, L.A. It's just a huge marketplace that you can really run centrally. I mean, at one time in our business, we struggled with the cultural differences. Would a New York City customer call Dallas, Texas to place an order? Well, yes, they will. That's not quite as difficult as figuring out whether a Paris, France customer will call Dublin, Ireland to feel comfortable placing an order. That's a very different issue. So you don't have a great economy of scale. Our margins are lower internationally. It doesn't make sense that they should be. The cost of doing business is so much higher in Europe and Asia than it is in the U.S., so margins ought to be higher. Funny thing, those local competitors don't feel that way. They just compete with each other. They have been for years and years, and they've driven margins down even lower than the U.S. margins. So it's a pretty difficult model to try to make some business, make some money in. I've basically, unfortunately, become a happy man in Asia. We did this acquisition a couple of years ago, and in the last 12 months, we reduced SG&A by a full 50%. Well, you don't reduce it by 50% without going in and drastically realigning operations and having a lot of people leave the company. That wasn't our grand design, but when magically sales didn't take off like we and some local management hoped they would, we had to go in and do that. So profitability has still been a little bit elusive for us with this global expansion. But again, why did we expand globally in the first place? It wasn't just to go make money in Europe and go make money in Asia. It was to keep some of the big U.S. customers, win other U.S. customers from other resellers in the U.S. who didn't go global and couldn't meet that customer's needs. So kind of another issue really is how do we measure whether we've really had success in our international operations? Straight P&L says we haven't made money. But from a strategy standpoint, have we differentiated ourselves not only in the U.S. but in other marketplaces from our competitors? Absolutely we have. Have we won a lot of good business that shows up on U.S. financials because we had a salesperson in Singapore or a salesperson in London? Absolutely we have. So you have that kind of business. How do you measure that? Basically, at some level, you get down to there's kind of two issues in the world of accounting about that. When you look at financial statements, are you giving Asia or Europe any credit for helping win some business in the U.S.? Basically, our financial department said, no, you only get credit for what you sell in your own region. Another issue is, well, do you take some of that U.S. overhead and allocate it to those foreign affiliates? Well, our finance folks said, of course you do. So we're getting financial statement. We did an expansion at some level with a major goal, not the only goal, but a major goal of servicing multinationals and at least our traditional customer base in the U.S. We expanded internationally to help support that, win that business, and keep winning additional business. We've been successful with that, but on a pure financial number basis, all we're doing is assigning overhead to the international affiliates from our operations. So the financial side doesn't really reflect that. Now, we have to make a profit on our own in these marketplaces, but again, that's something that's proven a little harder to do. And I'm not sitting here really saying, boy, our company just didn't support this thing, and finance doesn't understand, and our operations people didn't. I'm just talking to you about the real-life situation. You know, when you try to expand, you don't get... you don't add more people in all areas of your company really to support that international expansion. There's a lot of interesting questions. How should you allocate corporate overhead? But just in the real world, trying to make sure that you're really staying focused on what were your goals in the first place. Have you really achieved that goal? Are you reporting to your shareholders, to your management team, to your board of directors? Are you really reporting your progress against that? It's kind of an interesting question. How do you organize international business units? We have basically three functions or three functional areas in our company. That services business I mentioned, we have sales, and we have operations. So we've wrestled the last couple of years particularly with the issue of, do you have a general manager of Europe, a general manager of Asia, and a general manager of the Americas, and they all have a lot of autonomy to run their own businesses? Or do you have a more functional line approach? Do you say, we want a worldwide head of sales and have a coordinated sales strategy worldwide, a worldwide operations management, a worldwide services management? We have ultimately gone, we haven't fully implemented, but we are absolutely going to a functional orientation. At the end of the day, we think sales management knows more about running sales anywhere in the world than a general business person, a general business manager in Europe or in Asia. And an operations standpoint, we have so many custom systems that we've developed for our business. The software reselling business is so unique in the first place that we think the expertise of running operations is more important to understand the business, to understand the dynamics of running it. That's more important than someone who can tell us how the German market differs from the French market, from the U.S. market. So we're very much more going down the path of basically functional management. We do the matrix thing basically as well, but still we're going down the avenue of a functional orientation. We have that fully implemented with one exception. In Asia, we still have a general manager who no longer has our services business because we had to make some corrections there. It felt like it was time to bring the services person from the U.S. into to have a direct chain of command to rebuild that business. So we've implemented that. But the Asia Pacific general manager still has both sales and operations. And somewhere in the next 18 months, he needed to make a choice and make sure he becomes a specialist in one of those areas because he's going to have to be a specialist in one of those areas. That may have made more sense for us because we're trying to very much be a global business selling to global customers. Again, a large multinational wants the same kind of things from us all around the world. We're not trying to sell to primarily French banks, German banks, or Australian banks. We're trying to sell to the multinational companies, and that certainly would be one more thing that tells us we need to have a very coordinated approach from a sales standpoint, from an operations standpoint, from a services standpoint. Economic situations, another issue for us has been, a good example right now is, are the troubles in Asia enough to keep us from expanding into Asia? We have salespeople in Singapore and Hong Kong. Should we build our services business there? Well, there's a lot of problems in the Asian economy at this point. Singapore and Hong Kong aren't affected as much as some of the other regions, but basically, are we going to try to make our own economic forecast? No, we're not. We're going to read various forecasts, and we're going to talk to people on this, talk to a Microsoft and a Lotus, Singapore and Hong Kong offices. But just how much do we let worldwide economic conditions selling and a services presence. So I tend to look at that along the lines of, you have recessions and expansion periods. And a recession is when the economy's contracted a little bit for more than 3 quarters or whatever. And a strong expansion is you've had 3% growth for 4 years. In any part of our business, if I can predict an element of our business between a factor of 0.98 and a factor of 1.03, that's great stability as far as planning purposes, yet that's all the difference in the world of recessions and expansion. So just how much does that mean that no one in Singapore and Hong Kong are implementing NT these days, or exchange, or Lotus Notes? I don't think it really means that. So I'm encouraging us to go forward, as you might tell, using this as a platform to continue that pitch. But basically, the last thing is kind of the human side that I want to talk about just briefly. Do I feel successful with our expansion? Does our Asian business manager feel like he's been successful with that? I have to keep telling myself that we're making good progress. I have to keep my morale up. I have to make sure that when the Asian business manager turns in yet another loss, which he's going to do for a while, that he still feels, as long as he's making progress, that he still feels like the company appreciates and likes the fact that we have an Asian business. It's dragging down income a little bit, but it's a good thing to have it. It is. And so we need to make sure that he's focused on that he feels good about that. I've also learned that in the global scheme of things, how much do you worry about local differences and allow the local management in that country to tell you what you can and can't do, what will and won't work in that marketplace, versus how much do you trust your own instincts? Every business is different, but at this point, we have found a lot more success by basically falling back to the proposition that Software Spectrum happens to be the world's largest reseller of personal computer software and has been the most successful and the most profitable. So at the end of the day, I have to feel like Judy Sims and Richard Sims and some other executives, we actually know that business better than anybody. So we've built an $800 million U.S. business doing that. Somebody else may have built a $30 million New Zealand business doing that. Well, I think we actually know more about that business, certainly, than the person that happened to grow up in New Zealand and built the largest reseller in New Zealand. We just have had more experience, more big customers. So we basically, after a period where we really probably trusted local management a little too much and let them tell us a little too much about how we should develop a business plan, we've now leaned a little more back the other way and said, well, that's interesting, but let's try it this way. Let's try it our way first. And so, ultimately it did work in Canada. It did work in Europe. And it will work in Asia Pacific given enough time, certainly. So that's kind of the things that I wanted to talk with you a little about. I certainly enjoyed the journey of going into international and global business. We're not exactly where we want to be yet. The journey will certainly continue. What I'm going to do is, again, I appreciate this honor today. I'm going to use it as a way to keep my battery charged here and get a little bit recharged and keep going out there and try to avoid dropping those mushrooms into the soy sauce from quite that high distance. Try to still work with that local management team wherever it may be in the next market we go into and try to make an even smoother transition from where they have been to where they need to be to fit the Software Spectrum global picture. And I'll also say that I'm very glad that you're here and that you do what you do. I wish I had had some international business courses. I wish I had spent a little more time preparing for this international path that I've been involved in, the Software Spectrum has done. I wish I'd done a little more time preparing as opposed to just, well, gee, let's go do Canada, see what happens. Let's go do Europe and see what happens. And as I look back on my career, I realized I learned the most from one particular company that didn't necessarily do a lot of things right. In fact, they did a tremendous number of things wrong. But by seeing something go wrong, I learned so much more than by seeing a well-running company that just kept on running well. And so, at some level, I realized I'm now teaching those same lessons to young people in our company. They're watching me and Judy, in some cases, go off into new marketplaces, make a lot of mistakes. And so, if I'm teaching a few people in our company how not to do certain things, perhaps that's even more useful to them in their careers than showing them a company that's just had no problem whatsoever with the global expansion. So, again, thanks for the honor. I appreciate it. I'm going to get the old battery recharged and keep going out there global. Thanks very much.
You got any questions, Jim? Yes, sir. What is your strategy for Mexico and Latin America?
Mexico and Latin America are very small, probably about 4% of the world's software, I think is the last number I'd seen, is sold in that region. So our plan at this point is to basically have a field sales presence, possibly based in Miami, maybe based somewhere in that region. That basically is going to travel. A person, we'll start with one person. I didn't say this, but we started with one person in London, one person in Stockholm, whatever. We'll probably start with one person who travels that circuit. We'll figure out which multinational customers need us to visit them in those regions. We'll first go sell into those multinational customers, and at some point turn our attention to corporations based in that region. But it will be a one-person presence. Those customers will establish free phone lines in the good old Dallas, Texas, hire Spanish and Portuguese-speaking people here in Dallas, and go at it that way. And that's actually something we plan to do this year.
How are you dealing with the issue of piracy, especially in some international markets?
Well, piracy is just one of those factors in, why is not a lot of software sold in Asia Pacific outside of Japan? Piracy is a big part of that. Basically, the good thing for us is we sell mostly to large multinational companies. They have anti-piracy policies in their company. So despite local laws or local practices, if you're with Fortune 500 companies in the U.S., you may be in I guess the Philippines or Thailand are good examples of high piracy places. They don't pirate software. So we're selling to the few people who are buying in Asia Pacific, and we certainly try to help with awareness and cooperate with Microsoft. And Microsoft's leading the way there, so they have the most to gain. So we don't directly get involved. We just, as soon as somebody's worth actually paying for it, we try to sell it to them.
Do you think your industry is still a growth industry, or is it coming to maturity so that there may be some stabilization in sales and in growth? You see a lot of growth still out there?
In international marketplaces in general, or?
Well, in general, as well as in the international market.
Basically, I do. If you're take a look at Microsoft's results and over the last several years, are they still growing very much? They are. They're not growing with desktop software like word processors and spreadsheets. They're growing some there. But again, strategic computing. Microsoft's more of an infrastructure company suddenly with the back office and email system and the network operating system. So, again, we at this point have 800 people in the services division that probably had 150 people 4 years ago. So as PCs themselves and our PC software suppliers get more into strategic computing, we go more in a services direction as somewhat of a diversification strategy, but also somewhat that's just where we grew up selling Microsoft stuff, Lotus stuff, and IBM stuff. Well, that's pretty strategic stuff now. So we go in a more strategic direction. So there's still going to be, I think, pretty good growth basically in how much product is sold, but a tremendous opportunity for us to grow around implementing those technologies and that services.
Thank you very much. Richard, a small token of appreciation. You didn't answer one question.
What's that? It was the two of us with actually a friend had the idea. He finally just said, "Are you in it or not in it?" And we luckily jumped in and said, "We're in." So,
All right. So we should let him. Congratulations to both of you. Thank you very much. And we always tend to have businesses like yours. It's always a pleasure to hear about people that started off. We have never heard about an accountant, by the way, that was successful. Marketing people are normally the ones who should be successful in these things, but there is hope for accountants.
There's one more announcement which I will ask Julian to make later, but two things I forgot. I've been forgetting a lot today. I just want to recognize all those universities, who universities gave us money for this conference, and I hope you guys donate again next year. My telephone number is 806-651-2491. Do not forget us. And by the way, there are 25 students here. These are the future leaders. I do appreciate Kamlesh Mehta, who brought 6 students. West Texas A&M has about 16 students. But the man behind all these activities, Dr. Jerry Miller, he's sitting over there. He's also one of the persons who talked to Mr. Sims. And Ray Brimble, is Ray here? Okay. And Ray nominated Mr. Richard Sims and jurisdictions. So we are very thankful to these individuals, and I hope you had a great time, and I will give it to Julian. He has an announcement.
Just a friendly reminder, another 10 minutes we start our session on the euro, the single currency. Should be very stimulating. We have the consul generals from France and Germany. And both Eurosceptics as well as those who are pro-euro find this very interesting. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming again. That's adjourned. Again, at 5:15, please try to be in our business meeting. It's very important. Thank you very much.